There have been hundreds of reports of living thylacines in Tasmania since their alleged extinction in 1936. But you may have also heard of them being reported in Papua New Guinea. Thylacines used to live on the island of New Guinea before going extinct around 1000 BC. But could they have survived into modern times? But first, for all the cryptids in my audience, you know how hard it can be to stay hidden online. I've been bombarded with scam text messages and calls, and it's been incredibly frustrating. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura helps protect me from these annoying and potentially dangerous scams. You might have heard about the AT&T data breach where nearly all of their customers' call and text records were exposed. Even if you're not an AT&T customer, your number could be compromised if any AT&T user ever called or texted you. Luckily, Aura alerts me if my phone number or other sensitive information has been compromised in breaches like this. They also provide fraud alerts if someone tries to use that data to access my accounts. But I think the best feature is their call assistant filter that screens unknown calls for me, filtering out spam. If you want to protect yourself and your family from data breaches and scams like I have, you can go to aura.com/cryptid to try it out. The link is also in the description below. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control of your online security today with Aura. The story of the New Guinea thylacine starts in 1986. That's when cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans put them in his massive list of cryptids. Here's how he described them. There is a large dog-like animal sighted on Mount Guluwe in Papua New Guinea. As fossil thylacines have been found in this region, it is quite possible that some still survive there. This isn't a lot of information, and Heuvelmans doesn't elaborate elsewhere. He may have been talking about the writings of a man named Pierre Payar. Payar had heard about a large ferocious dog seen on Mount Guluwe from the locals. He even speculated that these dogs were related to Australia's thylacine. Whether or not this was a thylacine, it wouldn't take long for more concrete sightings to begin pouring in. One sighting came from the 1970s, but it wasn't reported to cryptozoologist Carl Schuker until 2003. A man named John Sarakong was hiking near the Puncak Jaya mountain with an associate. They had stopped to eat at an elevation of about 8,000 feet, or 2,400 meters. Suddenly, two canines, one adult and one cub, approached them from the forest. Here's how the encounter was described. Clearly drawn by the smell of food, the two animals walked nervously from side to side, eyeing the men and their food supplies, and approaching to within 20 yards. Eventually, the cub became bold enough to walk up to the men, who tried to feed it. But when one of them also tried to catch it, the cub bit his hand, and both animals then ran back into the bush and were not seen again. Carl Schuker also heard of thylacines from a grazer named Ned Terry in the early 1990s. Terry had heard reports from the locals of an animal called the dabsenga in the Indonesian part of New Guinea. According to these locals, dabsengas were mostly seen early in the day or later in the evening. They would make their dens in rocky areas and in caves. Appearance-wise, they were like dogs, but with a larger mouth and a very long tail. The body of the dabsenga had stripes and was described as very thin. It was also avoided by locals, who viewed it as being associated with evil spirits. Schuker noted that the dabsenga was very similar to a thylacine, especially since the thylacine could open its mouth very wide. Of course, as far as we know, thylacines don't associate with evil spirits. Another account from the 1970s was sent to cryptozoologist Gary Opit. It came from an American zoologist who was in a rainforest near the town of Wau when he spotted something crossing the road. Although the sighting took place at night, he identified it as a thylacine. Thylacine researcher Chris Rayberg heard a story from a British man who had been working in New Guinea back in the 1980s. He had been talking to locals when they heard a canine's call. The British man said it was probably a New Guinea singing dog, but they said it was a different dog with stripes. Rayberg noted that they said this unprompted and were adamant that it was a separate species of dog with stripes. The British man had also heard of a thylacine skin being in possession of a local shaman. He also backed up Ned Terry's statement about the thylacines being associated with evil spirits, as he heard the locals would avoid the animal due to it possessing magic. In 1995, anthropologist Garrett Sherkamp released a book about the Min people of Papua New Guinea. In the book, he states that people hunting on Star Mountain could accurately describe details of the thylacine. At some point in the 1990s, cryptozoologist Chad Arment heard about a thylacine from an exotic animal importer in Florida. The importer was buying reptiles in New Guinea when he was told of strange dogs similar in appearance to a thylacine. He was going to go on an expedition to find the animals, but Arment didn't hear if he was able to. 1997 would mark a sort of turning point. That was the year that the media began to publish information about the sightings. An Indonesian paper called the Suara Pembaruan ran an article titled, "Predator Resembling Tasmanian Tiger Found in Interior of Jayawarta." According to this article, the governor of the region, Jospus Wenas, had heard about thylacine attacks on livestock. Eyewitnesses described the thylacines traveling in groups and making their dens in caves. Wenas asked for equipment to try and find the tiger. The paper said that the inhabitants were afraid to attack the animal themselves out of fear that it would bring disasters. On the other hand, wildlife expert Johnson Mananseng didn't believe tigers were in the area, though he might have been talking about big cat tigers and not thylacines. That same year, 2 reports would come from Mount Carstens. Naturalist Richard Calalego claimed that he had seen thylacine footprints in the nearby forests back in 1993. Additionally, the Indonesian Conservation Agency heard reports of thylacine footprints by the mountain. In the year 2000, Malcolm Smith was contacted about thylacine reports by a man named Franz. Franz had been on expeditions in New Guinea since 1976, though he only started hearing about thylacines in the late 90s. That's when he was told about livestock attacks by thylacines in Oaksabil. Interestingly, Franz also said that the locals there recognized the thylacine not from a picture he purposely showed them, but from a stamp. Franz later went back with actual thylacine photos to see if anyone recognized them. He also brought photos of animals from Africa and South America to test if the locals were just trying to impress him. In the lowlands areas of Indonesia and New Guinea, almost nobody knew of the thylacine. But there was one man there who had lived in the highlands area, and he recognized the thylacine and told Franz it was very rare. Franz then went to the highlands, where more people recognized the thylacine. It was evidently very rare, as the kids in the village hadn't seen one, only the adults. One unique detail about the reports is that a man described it balancing on its hind legs to get a better view. This detail matches some descriptions of the thylacine given when it hadn't gone extinct yet. According to the Messy Beast article on thylacines, they could get up on their hind legs and even jump if needed. Sir Ray Lancaster said that they moved more like kangaroos than wolves. In 2019, a documentary filmmaker named Robbie Fatt would get in contact with Malcolm Smith about thylacine reports he had heard. According to the filmmaker, there were sightings in a small town in Papua New Guinea, near the border. From 2018 to 2022, James McIntyre of the New Guinea Wild Dog Foundation participated in several expeditions in West Papua. He carried a laminated photo of a thylacine with him and asked the locals if they knew of the animal. While none of them did, he did hear of a thylacine sighting from around 2002. According to the story, the villagers had found a very young thylacine, which they brought into their village. As it began to grow, the thylacine ended up biting too many people, causing them to kill and bury the animal. A radio caller would tell a similar story in 2019, though it was secondhand. While he was in Bali, he lived next to teachers from the Indonesian part of New Guinea. According to them, 2 small thylacines had been killed by a village due to attacks on livestock around 2016. Another correspondent of Malcolm Smith told him that he had been in the Jaya Mountains and had seen a thylacine. He wasn't expecting to see one, so he didn't have a camera, but he did describe it as gray in color. Finally, we get to the most controversial sighting, one sent to Forrest Galanti. Galanti claims that he was sent a photograph of the charred bones of a recently killed thylacine. However, he didn't share either the photo or the location of the thylacine's body. This obviously generated a lot of controversy, though he says it was because he wasn't given permission to share the photo in order to protect the thylacines. He did say he wanted to go on an expedition to New Guinea in order to look for the thylacines himself. So what are the chances that the thylacine in New Guinea survived its extinction? The fossil record shows the last known thylacine dying in New Guinea around 1 to 2000 BC. Now this is certainly a long time for there to be no fossils, but a lot of species were first found as fossils before live animals were discovered. The coelacanth is a very popular example of this, but there are also examples similar to a thylacine. The bush dog, a small canine from Central and South America, was first identified from fossils before live bush dogs were found. The Chacoan peccary was thought to be extinct when its fossils were discovered in 1930. But decades later in 1971, it was found alive and well. While these are exceptions to the rule, it does show that animals first found as fossils, especially relatively young fossils, could be out there waiting to be discovered. But if it isn't a living thylacine, there is a pretty good candidate for what people could be seeing. The New Guinea singing dog is a small type of dog found throughout the island. They've been noted to live in the same mountainous regions many of the thylacine reports are from. Gary Opit also pointed out that if thylacines were around, the hunters of the island would likely be wearing their skins. He said that the hunters were highly skilled and wore the skins of basically every somewhat large animal on the island. If thylacines did live in the mountains, he thought that they would be very few in number. He was a bit more optimistic about them living in the rainforest, as that's where he heard about the sighting from the zoologist. One odd detail from Ned Terry's report was that the Dabsenga was described as being associated with evil spirits. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Dabsengas are just evil spirits in folklore. A lot of regular animals get assigned supernatural characteristics, like ravens being a symbol of bad luck. Chris Rayberg even said that this might be a reason why the thylacine hasn't been found yet, since the people there wanted to avoid it and the bad spirits it brought with it. Going into this video, I had seen people consider the New Guinea thylacine to be one of the more plausible cryptids, and I do agree with that. But there are a couple of issues I see with the cryptid. A lot of these sightings are anonymous or instances where the names weren't recorded. This, of course, makes it harder to verify the details or check the eyewitness's background. The quality of these sightings also varies a bit. For example, Shuker's account from the 1970s doesn't even describe stripes on the animal. Shuker theorized that the stripes just weren't visible in the moonlight, but it is notable that the thylacine's most distinctive feature wasn't in the report. Additionally, mammal expert Tim Flannery was skeptical that thylacines would have enough food to live in the highland areas. I'm also a bit worried that the New Guinea thylacine is a sort of cope. Since we haven't found another living thylacine in Tasmania for decades, I wonder if some people's attention shifted away to a new place to possibly find thylacines. Regardless, there are quite a few high-quality reports of the animal, and it's a relatively small cryptid that would evade detection easier. Since we failed to protect the thylacine the first time, it would be nice to get a second chance. Thank you for watching. Once again, a big shout out to Aura and also the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog Foundation. Huge shout out to my Patreons Timothy, Wild World, Johnny Tsunami, John R., Jason Cook, and Lenarts. If you'd like to help me out, donating on my Patreon will give you access to future video polls and more projects I've made. If you'd like to see more cryptid videos, check out my playlist of them in the description and subscribe. I talk about the history of thylacine hunts and other cryptids in the video, The 10 Cryptids Most Likely to be Discovered, so check that out if you're interested. That's all for this video, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.